And then you've got to put your call to action in that gets them to do something. Because if you get people ready to buy, but then you don't ask them to buy, you're essentially just setting them to buy from the next person who emails them rather than yourself, which is probably not a good thing.
Hello and welcome to the Driven Female Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm your host, award-winning business coach, value whisperer, and founder of the Dream Clients Blueprint, your step-by-step guide to communicating your true value with confidence and attracting more of your perfect fit clients. To help you start attracting more clients immediately, you can access a free training I developed for you by visiting melittacampbell.com/training. On this show, each week, I bring you practical advice and tried and tested techniques through my own experiences and those of other successful business owners. Our goal is to help you dream bigger and confidently achieve more in your business and in life without ever feeling fake or burning out. Today, I'm speaking with Brodie, the author of the #1 best-selling and highest-rated book on email marketing, Email Persuasion. GetResponse called him one of the best email marketers in the world, and more importantly, he's helped thousands of course builders, creators, consultants, and coaches to build authority, engage their audience, and generate more sales with email marketing. In case you haven't guessed already, today I'm going to be speaking to Ian about email. More importantly, how can we make email in a way that feels manageable, is fun, and we can do it consistently? You are about to get a complete masterclass from Ian in how to use email as an effective part of your marketing strategy. So I can't wait for you to hear his insights. So welcome, Ian. It's great to have you on the podcast today.
It is fantastic to be here.
And I'm really excited to get stuck in today because we're going to talk all things email, which is a big question for a lot of people. Like, should I email? How often should I email? How do I get this whole email thing right? Oh my gosh, I have to do another email. So we're going to dive into tools, tips, everything to do with email in a moment. But before we do, I'd love it if you could share with the audience a little bit about your story. How did you get to where you are today?
Gosh, yes. Well, I guess like most people, my story is kind of an evolution. It kind of started when I set my own business up back in 2007. And I had various things I wanted to say about marketing and sales for people in consulting, coaching type businesses, training type businesses. So I started a blog, and that was very successful. I got a lot of traffic quite quickly. I collaborated with a lot of other people. But what I didn't get was a lot of clients or a lot of sales from that. And eventually a friend of mine said, Ian, are you sending emails out? And I went, oh, no, email's dead. It's 2007, Lee. Nobody emails anymore. And he said, you're an idiot. And he was right. So I did start emailing. And all of a sudden, the results started kind of happening from there. But I guess the real change was probably, I don't know, a number of months further in. I'd been emailing and I'd been filling all my emails with what I thought was the right thing to do, which was to fill them full of value and ideas and 75 tips on this and 33 ways of doing that. And eventually, I just ran out of content. I just got stuck. And said, oh, what am I going to write this week? So the only thing I could think of was something that I kind of occurred to me, and I talked to someone about earlier that week, which was a little story about when my wife, Kathy, had kind of kicked me up the backside a bit and told me to go and get some work done, or we got some work done in the garden. We'd always wanted a really nice vegetable patch and stuff like that. And there was a lot of clearing out needed to happen. And we just got stuck into it over the weekend. Ton of work. Kathy was pregnant at the time, but we got it done over the weekend. And then it's been there ever since. It's been absolutely brilliant. And it was just a really simple lesson about, sometimes you just need to grit your teeth and get stuff done if you want a result. And I was really worried when I sent that email out. I thought, it's too simplistic. There's no value in it. And it got the best result of any email I'd ever sent, because people were like, oh, no, I'm in that situation. Oh, that's just me. Oh, I get what you mean. I'm going to go off and take action right now. And it just suddenly taught me that, hang on, there's maybe something to this writing of emails, and maybe a little bit of a story and just engaging with people more than just sending lots of facts in an email. That just got me thinking, you need to figure out how to do this better and get better results from it. So, of course, I did my research, looked at different styles, experimented with different things, and kind of the email side has grown since there. I wrote a book a while ago that was very successful about email marketing, and more recently I've been running some kind of live courses and doing templates and stuff that just help people get good at email. But I think the key thing is, just like I was back then, most people don't do email as their only job. Obviously, they have a real life business to run. So there's lots of theories about how to write and stuff like that. But I think the key thing is making it easy for people so they can fit it in with the day job they've got and do it quite easily and quite quickly, and yet still get good results from it.
Yeah, a great evolution. And I love the kind of turning point while you're gardening and writing that story. And I think a lot of people have done that. They've thought, can I really share this story? And it's the same with me. Sometimes like, maybe this is too personal, or sometimes like, I haven't got time to write you an email today. So I'm just writing you an email to say why I haven't written you an email. And even that got lots of great results, because people saying, oh, thank you for letting me off the hook, that even you aren't sending out your emails out. It's good to be consistent, but sometimes it just isn't possible. So I thought, well, I'm just going to own that. And yeah, it was really successful. But I also know from my corporate days, when I used to do internal communication, I had to write a newsletter and tell people stories. And I'd go and sit with them, say, right, tell me about what you do. And they would always say, oh, but I don't do anything special. I'm just really boring. I'm just really normal. So how can people find stories to talk about when we just think, well, I'm just running a normal average day? That's not very interesting.
Yeah, well, I think I would always try and split up what you write into two different things. There's the topic that you write about, the particular subject, the thing that, if you're sending a newsletter, it's usually some tips, some ideas, some insights that you send to people. So there's the topic. And then you've got the story that you use to illustrate it, or the way that you illustrate it. So firstly, separating those two things helps, because then for every type of topic, you've got 3 or 4 different ways you can illustrate it. So that gives you more scope to write more different things. In terms of the stories, those ways of illustrating things, I tend to like to use kind of prompts to just trigger my thinking. I was always a big fan growing up of Edward de Bono's work on kind of brainstorming and his kind of 6 thinking hats, or the use of provocations, or just opening at a random word. So I ended up creating a series of story prompts, as I called them, which are just things of just little words or phrases or questions to ask yourself. And you read it and you go, oh yeah, I've got one of those. And they fall into 4 categories. There are stories you can use that are personal stories about things you've done. And that can date right back to when you were a child, through to your first job, through to as you got better at your job, you got more senior, etc., through to, things that happened very recently. So just to use an example, if you wanted to, let's say you were a business coach and you wanted to write some tips on time management to your audience, if you just think back and think, well, is there anything related to time management that happened to me when I was a child? And you think, oh yeah, in my case, I missed half my A-level physics exam because I got the time wrong. And it took my brother kind of noticing and then sending a teacher to go and get me, etc. So I'm thinking, well, maybe there's a lesson there about finding someone else to share your goal with so they can help you out if you screw up on time management. So there's a little story I had there to tell. And the story about me messing up my A-levels is it's interesting. Or you go to your first job, so you think, in my job, did I mess up at any time? Did I learn a secret? Did a mentor help me? So you've got all these kind of little prompts to help you with your personal stories. Second category I like to use is client stories or customer stories. And they're great because, of course, they establish a bit of credibility about the results you get with clients. But if you just think of your clients or the people you've worked with, have they got any interesting stories related to the topic? So if I've helped a client, if I was that business coach and I helped a client, how did they improve their productivity? You can give across the same tip, but now you wrap it in a client story. Or you've got third-party stories, which are if there are some kind of case studies of people who are famous for productivity or time management. So I got a really good book, I forget what it's called now, but it's about the working habits of lots of famous writers and creators. So, how Ernest Hemingway started his day or didn't start his day, got up late, etc., or how famous painters started their day and how they got creative and stuff. So I could dive into that book and bring out a story of them. And that's interesting because people are interested in how successful people do things. Or you could compare some of them and do that. Or you could do your own research. You could phone around 10 of your clients and see what their kind of habits in that area are. So there's those third-party stories. And then you've got what I call left field stories, which I think are quite fun. This is where you just make a connection between your topic and something people wouldn't normally expect. And usually it's from the world of entertainment or sport or science or something like that. So you think for productivity, you could do productivity tips from Charlie Chaplin. And I have no idea whether Charlie Chaplin has any productivity tips, but maybe if I looked into him, I could say, well, he made a lot of films. So how did he get so good at did he reuse certain things? Did he make life easier for himself in certain ways? He essentially played the same character I'm just brainstorming here, but he played the same character in every film. So maybe that was a productivity tip, etc. Or, something from a TV show you watched last night, or, what Jane Austen taught me about marketing, or whatever it might be. And those are kind of interesting and fun, and people will read them and get interested in them because they've not seen anything like that before. I guess the one thing on those is don't use the obvious one. So don't do leadership tips from George Washington or Abraham Lincoln because everybody's heard those before. Do leadership tips from Grover Cleveland, the 22nd president of America, which people haven't heard before, or an unusual story that you found out about Abraham Lincoln that hasn't been told before because you read his biography or something like that, and you share that. So you got to share something unusual to make it interesting. But if you look in those 4 categories and you give yourself those kind of prompts to think about them, you can usually come up with, for any topic, probably about 3 or 4 different ways of exploring it or talking about it that people are going to find interesting.
Yeah, and I did your course, and when we went through this exercise, my mind was blown with just how many stories I had around one tiny topic. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've got like 20 stories that I could bring out with that. And it's made it so simple to structure it that way and have that prompt, as you say. And it's funny you mentioned Charlie Chaplin, because where I live now is where Charlie Chaplin lived. So we've got his museum and it's recreated his studio. So if you're ever passing, I will take you there and show you how he got all his films done. It's fascinating. He was incredible.
But this stuff, that's another clue. Do a little bit of research. I always say the secret to creativity is not inspiration, it's preparation. And it's the work you do beforehand. So it's the, brainstorming beforehand, either the stories or the topics that you might be covering. It's keeping notes, and for the life of me, I can't remember where this quote came from, but I'm sure it was from a stand-up comedian who said the difference between a normal person and a professional comedian is if a normal person's standing at a bus stop and they see someone walk into a lamppost, they'll laugh. But if a professional comedian's there, they'll write it down in their notebook and they'll find a way of working it into their act. And so that's another part of the preparation is just to take notes. As soon as an idea hits you, you see something interesting or fun, just take a little note. Of course, these days we do it on our phone, we dictate it or tap it into a notes app on our phone, so that later, because we just forget these things. And as you say, if you try and think of an idea as you're about to write, it's really hard. You're under pressure. Usually you end up just using the same old that you did a few times before. But if you take some time out beforehand to do some brainstorming and you keep notes as you go along, so you've got a little database emerging of these different ideas, you really do end up with a lot of great stuff. And of course, because you've done it beforehand, you'll have another idea about that topic in the shower, for example, or when you're out gardening or you're doing something else and you're a bit relaxed. These ideas will come to you. Again, write them down. You probably don't have a notebook in the shower, but maybe hold on to the thought for 2 minutes and get it written down. And then when it comes time to write, you've got this pre-prepared database of great ideas you can just pick one from and get on with it. And it just makes the writing way, way easier.
Yeah. And I guess it's probably like a muscle as well. Once you start finding the stories, you'll start finding even more stories and train yourself to turn experiences into, that's a little story I can tie into this.
I think that's a good point. There's another saying, something like, email marketers don't have disasters. They have food for stories they can write. And you do get that. I actually had a couple of people wrote back to me. It was kind of, only you could write about this. And it was I'd written it about a stag night. I sent it out late on a Sunday because I had a bit of a hangover. And it was a stag night I'd been on the night before. But just writing about the hangover, but writing about the interesting characters I met on the stag night and how they were from all kind of walks of life. And it was really interesting listening to them. That relates to, I think reading quite widely helps as well, because I was able to link that to a quote from John Stuart Mill, the kind of, I don't know, 19th or 18th century philosopher who wrote about, I can't remember the exact quote, but it's about how there's, no greater skill than pulling and meeting people from all sorts of different facets of life in order to feed your mind and open your mind to other things. And I thought I just had enough that I could remember that quote. I Googled it and linked it to the story about all the different people I met on the stag night, and boom, I've got an email. So, and I think you're right. It's that kind of muscle that's developed that normally you might just wake up with a bit of a hangover and think, oh God, but if you've done that kind of thing a few times, you just think, oh, that was vaguely interesting. How can I link it with something else? Now I've got that together into a unique email.
Yeah. And it's interesting you said there about reading. I remember when I very first went online and I was starting to do social media for the first time, and I was like, well, a bit like email, like, what do I say? I didn't know what to put. And a mentor that I had at the time, he said what he does is he doesn't read 10 pages of a book every day. He reads a page of 10 books. And then you start to see a pattern between them. And he said, sometimes I don't even read the page. I just read the first paragraph. And there's always something that triggers something else. But by reading 2 or 3 books, you can find a link between them that's different, that no one else has found before, or it's something that isn't a tried and tested thing. As you say, you don't want to share those same old tips that people have heard 10 million times. But if you can share something a little bit different and a slightly different take on that, then it can help. But just coming up with that out of the blue is really difficult.
And another technique I used to use, and I think you're right, that you need to put a different spin on it. I mean, if you're sharing tips, there are kind of universal truths. A lot of what we do, what everyone does, is probably about 80% the same and 20% different, because there are things that are true for everyone. But if you put a different kind of story on it or explain it in a different way, people learn. I think it takes often 3 or 4, hearing something 3 or 4 different times in different ways before people really get something. So don't be afraid to reuse the same tip multiple times, but explained in different ways and coming at it from different angles. And if you do that, it's still interesting to read because it's a different story, a different way of explaining it, and it will sink in for different people at different times. And a technique I used, this was with a membership program I was running, and we did like a challenge of writing a post on LinkedIn every day. And one of the methods I gave to people was just go to Brainy Quote on the web. And if you go to Brainy Quote, you'll get 5 or 6 quotes of the day coming out. And the idea was, don't use the obvious one. So if you write about leadership, there'll often be a quote about leadership. Don't use the leadership quote because lots of people have used it before. Use a quote about love, or use a quote about comedy, or use one of the, but then twist that quote to apply to your particular topic. And it's almost always possible, because love is about relationships and leadership is about relationships. So you can take that quote about a different thing and apply it. And there's a guy who writes about copywriting. I'm not sure I'm going to pronounce his name right. It's Colin Theriot. He runs a group called the Cult of Copy, which is quite a fun group because it's a group about learning from a kind of amoral approaches and people who used persuasion techniques for evil and learning how to use their techniques for good in your own thing. That's his kind of shtick. But he has this thing of he will take a quote from every single day. He will take a quote from someone who was born on that day, and then turn that into a little tip on persuasion or on writing. And he managed to do that, every day, minus a couple of exceptions, which he then filled in the next year, every day for a year. And it's some way there was the kind of restriction, but also the separation. A client of mine told me it was the separation that helps with creativity, that if you brainstorm your topics and your stories in advance, and then there's a bit of separation in time before you write about them, or if someone else tells you the topic to write about, or you take it from a quote, it becomes easier to write because you're then constrained by that one thing. Whereas if at the time you go, I need to think of a topic, and you'll think, oh, maybe this, and then you'll start writing and it's difficult and you go, oh, no, I'll change the topic, and you go round and round in circles. But if you're constrained by, I must write about this because I thought about it earlier, it then becomes easier. And so the constraint makes it easier to write for some reason.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like I got my business degree from an art school, and when we were limited and say, well, this is the topic, like express leadership with a black charcoal stick and nothing else, then you're like, oh, you can't use all the different tools in your toolkit. You have to think, well, how can I do this with just a black line, or what could I do differently with this bit of charcoal that perhaps could express something different? But then you've got really creative with those boundaries. And I think you're right that the limitation really does help. It kind of focuses your thinking a little bit, doesn't it? I had written down, my next question was going to be, can you reuse tips? Do you have to always come up with new tips the whole time? So you've answered that brilliantly, which is like, no, just find a different way of expressing it.
Yeah.
And there's an expression, isn't it? Your mum will tell you something 10 million times, and then your auntie will come and say exactly the same thing, but a slightly different way. And you're like, oh, that's genius. And your mum is like going, But I've told you
What?
that. So when it comes to email marketing, one of the biggest problems, of course, is that you start to write an email and you're facing that blank page. Is that the solution, to find these stories in advance, find your tip and kind of marry the two up?
I think it is. There's the two elements. So we've just gone into a bit of details on the stories. I think the other side of it is, what are the topics I should write about?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the safest bet there is to think about your ideal clients, because most of us, when we do email marketing, we're writing to a potential client or customer. Think about them and think about what, again, in advance, do a kind of brainstorming exercise. What are their big problems and challenges and goals and aspirations? And in some ways, those are two sides of the same coin. You know, a goal could be the upside of a problem, but sometimes I find it easier to brainstorm them separately. So just say, what are the biggest problems my clients have, and make a list of those. What are the biggest kind of things they complain about or issues? It could be problems that I've known from working with them or being in the same situation, things I've read, that the problems they have, the kind of books that they buy, what they grumble about at conferences or in forums, all those kind of sources of information, or a survey you might have done. Use all that as a source, and then brainstorm top problems, challenges, and then the flip side, the goals. What are they trying to achieve? What do they aim? What would they really like to get out of life? Take that as a starting point. And then you can expand on it as well, because for any kind of problem or a goal, you can always drill down into it. So if you've ended up with a kind of high level problem, well, their main problem, if it was in my world, their main problem is, not enough people are taking action on their emails. So you think, well, why might that be? Well, it might be I don't have a big enough email list, or maybe people just aren't opening the emails, or maybe they're opening them but not reading them, and maybe they're reading them but not clicking but not taking action when they get to the other side. And then you can drill into each of those. Why are people not reading my emails? Well, maybe it's just not interesting enough. Maybe it's not about the right topic, etc., etc. So for any high level topic, you can drill into lots of other ones, or you can go up. If you come up with a really detailed one, or they really struggle to come up with the right subject line, okay, well, what's that a symptom of? They're not being creative enough about, or they don't understand what their ideal clients are interested in, for example, could be a higher level one. So if you explore those, and you don't have to do it all in one session, otherwise you'll be there all day. You can, start off, get an initial list, and then come back to it over time. But that gets you the kind of topic list that you can then marry with stories. So you can take each of those topics. So if you came up with a topic of, I don't know, not enough people opening emails, I would then think, well, personal stories. Have I got a personal story about people not opening my emails? And I did have one about a subject line I wrote out that was too clever. I was trying to be too fancy and too clever. I called it Hiding from Shadows or something like that. But anyway, it was my worst ever open rate. And so the very email afterwards, I sent out an email saying my worst email ever. And loads of people opened that because they wanted to find out what my worst email ever was. And it was about the previous email. So you kind of, you're just taking those little things. That's an example from my experience. Have my clients had a really good open rate, really bad open rate? If I did a third-party one, would be research on the web. What makes for successful opens, what doesn't? Or could I do something weird? So what relates to opening? Dating profiles. I could say, what gets people to swipe left or right on a dating profile? Can I apply that to email? So you can use, again, all those 4 categories to come up with multiple stories for those topics. So as you said, do it in advance. Otherwise, you'll get kind of stuck on the day. But do that brainstorming about problems, challenges, goals, and aspirations. And I think you're always on good ground there, because people are always interested in anything you can help them with about the problems they've got or the goals they want to achieve. So they're inherently going to be a bit interested in that topic. And if you can then illustrate it in an interesting way through your story, you double thumbs up.
Yeah, exactly. And I think once people dig into this, they have their big topic, they brainstorm the mini topics underneath that, link that up with the stories. I can see, and I've experienced as well, that it can get quite addictive. Suddenly you're going from, oh, do I have to send out a whole email every month, to I haven't got enough days in the week to share
exactly.
everything.
And you can make series of them as well. Once you start doing this kind of brainstorming, we get a big topic and you split it. You think, oh no, I could write 4 in series. And that would sequentially build my credibility in that area, because I've just sent them 4 tips on one particular topic, on covering all the aspects of it. That will position me as really knowing quite a lot about that. But also the series is some ways easier to write, because you get on a roll. You write the first one and the second one and the third one. They all lead on from each other. I'm a last minute writer personally. I was on a summit a while ago and someone said, you're either a planner or a pantser, like seat of your pants. And I'm definitely a pantser. So I tend to, if I'm doing a series, I'll say what the series is. I might write the titles, but I don't write them till the last minute. But other people will find it much easier to just take a couple of hours out and write 5 emails all about the same topic leading on from each other. That's probably easier than my way, but it depends on what your preference is.
Yeah, and I like doing that with blogging as well. I'll take a topic and then break it down. So if I want to talk about productivity as like, well, the top to 5 tips, and then maybe 1 or 2 of those I'll go into more detail in a different one, or quotes or a wrap-up post. This is what someone else shares on that. And it does like give you more scope then to cover it in more detail, but without overwhelming people, and including yourself.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. One of the big things I learned about email compared to my early emails I send out is that it's much easier for people to open one short email relatively frequently. So let's say if you were writing an email every month, the problem with writing an email every month, then, great if you're writing a monthly email, kudos to you. I would suggest writing less, but more frequently, because if you write an email every month, the pressure is on to make a big impact with that email. So you try and cram it full of stuff. And the thing is that when people are opening that email, it's much more difficult to find 20 minutes spare to read a big email once a month than it is to find 5 minutes every week. People can easily find a couple of minutes to quickly, if they just open an email, oh, yeah, that was good. That's easy. Opening it and going, oh, my God, I don't have 15 minutes to read this. So lots of littler emails. And a series is good for that because you can split your topic up into lots of little points rather than having to get it all into one big email.
Yeah, and I guess when you start that sequence, then they're looking out for the next one as well. So
that's true as well.
I guess that improves your open rates at the same time.
It does. And if you get smart, you can start dropping hints, leaving like a cliffhanger at the end of the first email to hint at what they're going to learn in the second email. It just increases the amount that people are going to open that next one.
And if you're a bit pantsy, then it gives you accountability too, to actually write it, I guess.
It does. It forces you to keep going.
So if we've chosen topics that align with people's problems and challenges that they're looking to solve at the moment, and we've added into that a story, that's the interest part. The tip is the value. What about the sales? Because I know this is a problem I had in my emails, is that I was writing all these things, giving all this value. I was being really nice, but then I was like, well, how do I say, oh, and you can buy from me? It felt really out of place within that. Is there a way to sell through emails without feeling salesy?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right that it's a big challenge for lots of people. And most of us, I think, because very few people are, I think, natural salespeople. There's some people who are and how, don't mind at all sending an email that's just a sales pitch. But most of us, I think, struggle with that. I think there are 2 angles to it. The first is to recognize that for most sales, they're not happening instantly, 2 minutes after people sign up. So it's going to take time, and you've got to build credibility and trust. And the first thing is to think about, what does that actually mean? We use that phrase a lot. Well, you need to build credibility and trust before people will be ready to buy. Well, what does that really mean? And I think that means that people, at the time at which they become ready to buy, have a certain set of beliefs and feelings about their problems, about themselves, about you, about your products, that mean, yeah, I need to do something now, and this is the right person to do it with. And if you're intentional about it, you can help establish some of those beliefs in your emails. Now, establishing those beliefs can't be the main topic of the email because it's kind of not inherently interesting. So one belief might be that if someone's ready to, buy my course on email marketing, they might have to believe that, Ian's a great teacher on his courses and I can really learn from him. If I wrote an email that said, hey, I'm a great teacher, you can really learn from me, nobody's going to be interested in that. Everyone's going to throw it to spam or whatever. So you have to kind of embed that. It's a bit like product placement in a film. You have to embed it in the message. So, and this is where your stories come in. So if you think through first, another bit of your brainstorming, what would someone need to know and feel or believe to be ready to buy from me for my main product, or at least take the next step towards working with me, like getting on a call with me, and note those things down. And it may be that, after they've got a problem that they need to solve, it's quite an urgent problem, that doing what they're doing today isn't going to be enough, that you've got some great solutions for them. What you do is different to what they've tried before. Now's the right time to do something, etc. If you write those beliefs down, then think, when you've written your initial email using the techniques we've talked about before, and you've written a really interesting email that's valuable, you then think, okay, is there anything I can do in that email that ticks off one of those beliefs? And some types of email do that more naturally than others. So, for example, if you're using personal stories, and about a problem where you had that problem, that can build your credibility in terms of being able to solve it, because they can see that you had that problem yourself and you were able to address it. And it creates a little bond of empathy as well, that you're more likely to understand them because you've been through the same thing yourself. If you're telling a story about some of your clients who succeeded with your methods, that builds credibility in terms of Ian's methods work. So, for example, maybe I'd written a tip about email subject lines. Then I thought, well, if I want to build the belief that I'm a great teacher and I can teach people in ways that work, why don't I use a story about a client who's been through one of my courses, took the email subject line techniques in there, used it and got a great result. And so I give the same tip about 5 different ways of writing email subject lines, but I tell it wrapped in a story about a client who got great results from it. And then that gets across the impression without me being super overt and poking people in the eye with it. Oh, Ian's techniques work and people who do his courses get good results. And you can apply that to any of the beliefs by just using different stories and I wouldn't try and put it all into the mixing pot together. I would first of all just write a good email that gives across good tips, but then afterwards think, is there any way I can tweak this, or can I pick a story to illustrate this that helps demonstrate some of the things I want to demonstrate? So that's the first element, is you want to build those beliefs, those ideas in their mind about the things they needed to know and feel to be ready to buy over time. And then you've got to put your call to action in that gets them to do something. Because if you get people ready to buy, but then you don't ask them to buy, you're essentially just setting them to buy from the next person who emails them rather than yourself, which is probably not a good thing. So the thing there to do is I like to use, I think it's okay every now and then to do a pure sales email. If you're launching a new product, if you're going to do a webinar, it's okay every now and then to have an email that is just about selling that product, or just about joining that webinar where you'll give some more value and promote the product. But I think you can also put calls to action that leads to sales in pretty much any email, as long as you do it right. And I think a good way to do it is just to make sure that your call to action is a natural next step from the ideas, the information you've shared in that email. So first of all, it has to not just. So if you've just written an email with some tips on LinkedIn profiles, then at the bottom, you don't want a promo for your Facebook advertising course, because that's, that just, where did that come from? You probably want something to do with getting better at LinkedIn. But what you really want to do is, in the next step, first of all, think through what's a realistic next step. So if you're selling an online course, maybe it's realistic people click to go and see the sales page for that course. Seems reasonable. If you're selling $100,000 of a big consulting project, probably they're not going to click and pay with their credit card. They probably need to have a conversation with you first. So the next step might be, would you like to arrange, a call where we can talk through some of your challenges in this area, etc. So think about what the next step is, and then think, okay, what's the best way of leading to that from the content I've got? And usually it's to point out one thing extra that they get from this next step you're asking them to do, one thing at a time. And the reason I say one thing at a time is, in a content email, if you reach the end of a content email and it then says, if you'd like to get more great techniques like this with more in-depth training, then why not try my new LinkedIn online program, click here for more details. That sounds like, oh yeah, well, that makes sense. I've got some useful tips. I do want more, or no, I don't want more. But it's not jarring. It's not going to get people who might buy later to instantly leave and get upset. But if you get to the end of an email that says, here's some tips on LinkedIn, why not go and find out more about my LinkedIn training? It's got this, it's got that, it's got this, and there's like 10 pages of promo for it. That begins like you've switched from helping mode to sales mode. And I think it's best to stick to helping mode. Help. If you want more, and the more could be, more in-depth training, it could be personal support, it could be do this faster, it could be useful tools, it could be a community to support you. Pick one element of what you're trying to promote and mention that, and get people to move on to it, to click through to find out more about it, where it talks about the rest of the stuff. Because with email, it's not like, an advert on Facebook or anything where you've only got one shot. You're going to be sending them an email in a week's time or a couple of days' time where you can mention another aspect of your product. So you don't have to cram it all into the sales email. And that's one of the nice things about email, because there's always another email. Firstly, it means each email doesn't have to be perfect. But secondly, it means if you're promoting something, you don't have to cram every bit of the good stuff, every benefit into one email. You can eke it out over time, and eventually you'll hit the right one. If you've got a sales page on a website, you kind of need to cover everything, because they're only going to read it the once. So it has to have every aspect, every benefit of the product, every question that they might want to answer. And that's why sales pages are so long. They annoy a lot of people, but they also work because they answer all the questions people have. In email, you have the luxury of answering all those questions one at a time, email after email. So you only need to put one in. So that's what I would say is give your tip, make a logical next step. So if it's a tip on productivity, if you'd like to get more in-depth productivity techniques like this, you might like to consider my, online training course or whatever it is. Click here for more details. And that's an easy flow. Yeah, I would like that. Or if you want 27 more techniques like this, or if you want like my personal support to help you implement this. So pick one element of extra goodness they'll get from your paid thing, mention that, link to the next step, which could be a page or somewhere to book a call, etc.
I really love that idea of that next one small step, because that feels natural. It feels natural to them, but also it feels much nicer for us to write as well. When we are trying to desperately tell them everything and push them to something, it feels difficult and awkward, and it doesn't feel nice. And if it doesn't feel good for us, then it's almost guaranteed it's not going to feel good to the other person. So I love that. And I also love the hidden message there for all those perfectionists out there who are listening, that it doesn't have to be perfect. There's always another email tomorrow.
Email's a bit like compound interest, isn't it? The compound interest was it Warren Buffett who said it was, or Albert Einstein, or someone said it was the most miraculous thing in the world, but it works little by little. People who earn a lot through investments don't earn it overnight. They earn it because it compounds a little every day. And it's the same with your emails. You typically don't get someone going from, I'm not interested in this, to, oh, I want to buy it in one email. But little by little, you build credibility, you build trust in every email. They get closer and closer to being ready to buy. And then the little call to action is then enough. That little nudge at the end is then enough to get them to buy. It wasn't that nudge on its own. It was all the previous emails as well. But put together, you've compounded those beliefs, you've compounded the credibility, and they're then ready to take action.
Yeah, amazing. Ian, thank you so much for sharing such a complete email course in just 30 minutes or so. And talking of little next steps, I believe that you have put together an email topic toolkit for the audience that they can download. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
We have, yes. So if you just think back to what we talked about earlier in the session, where you have those two ways of coming up with topics or with things to write about in your emails. You have the topics themselves and then the stories and ways of illustrating it. And I mentioned some techniques for coming up with the topics and these story prompts. So I've got this thing I'm calling the email topic toolkit, which will take you through those brainstorming exercises. They'll give you the story prompts you can use to just go through your topics and think, have I got this? Have I got that? Have I got this? Have I got that? In those 4 categories, plus a few other techniques you can use to come up with ideas for emails. And you can get that by going to ianbrodie.com/email topic toolkit, all one word, and you can download that from there, and that should get you going. And you should hopefully never again be stuck coming up with a topic for an email.
Oh, amazing. Thank you so much. And I've been using this myself, and it is fantastic. It makes it so much easier. And yeah, you're never stuck looking at that blank screen. It suddenly becomes so much easier to get into the flow and create emails that feel very personal, let people get to know you bit by bit, share value, nudging people a little bit closer into your business the whole time, but feeling very nice the whole way through. So,
Excellent.
So thank you for sharing that. If people want to know more about you, is that the same place to go to, ianbrodie.com?
It is, yes. That's where I live and kind of publish stuff. And I mean, for me, you won't be surprised to hear the best way to find out more is to go there, get on my email list, and then we'll interact through email is always the best. I'm on LinkedIn as well and stuff like that, but email is the place where I tend to do the most.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ian. And you'll find all those links in the notes underneath as well. Thank you so much for sharing just incredible value today, Ian. It's been great to have you with us.
My pleasure. Been fantastic. Really good questions as well.
Thank you for joining us today. I hope you took away as much value as I did and loved this masterclass in email. Come and join the discussion in the Dream Clients Club on School, that's School with a K, and let me know what your biggest takeaways have been from this episode. And if you enjoyed the show, then please do leave a review on iTunes. It really helps more female entrepreneurs to benefit from all the wisdom in the show. and share this podcast with your network and business besties so they can grow alongside you. There are a lot more tools, tips, and insights coming up for you in the next episode, so don't miss next week's podcast, or better still, subscribe now so you never miss your weekly dose of inspiration. And remember, go and visit melittacampbell.com/training to access your special training that I've developed for you to help you start attracting more of your dream clients. I'm Melitta Campbell, your business coach and value whisperer, and I look forward to seeing you again in the next episode.